So hey everybody, this is the second video on topic 4.12 on African Americans in the early republic. Topic on this one is slavery, resistance, and slave revolts. This is honestly one that I find myself kind of stumbling through a little bit from time to time, primarily because this is an issue that is so difficult to talk about and keep things at a really kind of big, broad surface level, which is something that we kind of need to do on some of these College Board topics. So um, let's see what we have here and then see what connections we can make to other topics that we've talked about through the course of this time period. Thanks. So the real purpose here in 4.12, at least for this part of it, slavery and resistance, is to chart the growth and development of the institution of slavery and the resistance towards that institution over the course of this 60 or 70-year stretch that we have in this time period. Uh, by the year 1790, there are about 700,000 enslaved people in the United States, and by the time you get to 1860, that number is closer to 4 million. This graph tops out about 3.7, but some estimates have it closer to 4.5 million through here. What all of these demographic sources tend to agree on is the fact that the enslaved population is doubling about every 25 years. This doubling is really at the same pace that the overall population is doubling in the United States, once every 25 years throughout this entire antebellum period, from President George Washington up to the outbreak of Civil War and secession in 1861. This is happening despite the fact that here in 1808, there is no more international slave trade in the United States, which means from this point forward, there is only legal, you know, importation of slaves, but everything is happening through natural population increase. And as you can see on here, breaking this down by the different colors, there is like Maryland and Virginia and the Carolinas and Georgia, like the original 13 colonies, there is some growth, but it is stagnant when you compare it to places like Kentucky and Tennessee, and especially here in Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. This is the growth of the cotton belt taking place right in the heart of this time period, and you can really see that the growth and the expansion of this really kind of picks up really after 1820, and even more so into the 1830s and 40s and 50s. So more on that in topic 413 as we look at this. Here, if we're focusing solely on the African American population, enslaved workers in the South are primarily working as plantation workers because of that growth of the cotton agricultural economy through this time period. That there is, you know, there are so many ways to kind of talk about and to try to get into what slave life was like, that it's really not possible to do this other than to say that it was difficult at best. It was difficult on the best of days. That if there was any kind of concern that slave owners would have towards resistance from their workers, the punishments were kind of harsh, public, and inhumane, as a way to try and demonstrate to anybody else that this is the type of punishment that is waiting for you if you openly resist or rebel. So far as household workers are concerned, they are really in a situation where they are asked to be domestic workers to take care of the families for Southern plantation slave owners. But there's also a sense of vulnerability here, as young girls that are enslaved and working in these situations are sometimes going to be put in harm's way from predatory behavior from young men or plantation owners, older men, as they are kind of conducting their household business, their household affairs. This really means that resistance to this type of authority is got to be very meticulously be like very, very cautious as you try to work your way through this. So for the most part, the majority of the resistance towards a slave structured society is through nonviolent resistance. A very passive way, by slowing down work, sometimes by breaking tools or feigning illness. This is going to help perpetuate stereotypes that the African Americans are incompetent at their job, or that they are not strong enough to conduct their job on a steady basis. And that is sometimes seen as an okay stereotype as it comes in, because it is going to lead to potentially more humane treatment in the short term if it's a very tenuous existence overall. On the more, I guess, active resistance, still on nonviolent resistance, is escape. And this is going to be more prominent as you go further into this time period, because as slavery expands in the numbers in the 1840s and 50s, that is where the Underground Railroad begins to take shape and start to do its work, well, later in this time period than at any point really before. In the category of violent resistance on this would be slave revolts. Slave revolts are really seen as a last resort because of the obstacles that occur in the planning phases of this. To plan a successful slave revolt was going to require lots of coordination and lots of planning, which would be difficult to do in these situations where you don't have much control given to you over your day-to-day life. There are three slave revolts from this time period that get more attention than others because of the size and the scope of what was going on with this. One is in 1800 in Virginia, and this is just referred to these days as Gabriel's Rebellion. The plan on this was to go to Richmond, Virginia, to capture the governor, that's future President James Monroe, and to hold him hostage so there can be a negotiation for freedom for this. The problem here is like the level of coordination that goes into this, that the plot was ultimately discovered. It was delayed because of bad weather, and then in that delay, the plot was discovered and 23 conspirators were executed. And so you go about another generation down the road, and then the next major slave revolt is going to be in South Carolina, and this is the Denmark Vesey slave revolt. The plan here was to commandeer ships from Charleston Harbor and ultimately take those ships and escape to Haiti. This is again going to be discovered before the plot can be put into execution, and this is going to lead to another round of executions for the conspirators that are directly involved. And then the third of these is the Nat Turner Revolt in 1831 in Virginia. This is going to come to some level of fruition as slaves are going to rebel and kill somewhere around 60 Southern whites, men and women and children, all in the process while they're trying to free other enslaved people going throughout. The result on this is that that is going to be suppressed by the state militia, and ultimately 56 conspirators are going to be executed. The asterisk on that 56 is a reminder for me to make sure I'm letting you know that there are 56 conspirators that are killed, but some of the people that were executed are not necessarily conspirators. They just may have had knowledge of the revolt and the process of things and didn't do anything to stop it. And there is also going to be other punishment given out to another hundreds, 1 to 200 enslaved workers in the South that are going to they're not going to be killed, but they're going to have severe physical punishment as a result of all this. As you go from 1800 to 1822 to 1831, the numbers on this seem to get a little bit bigger, and this is why, again, like I talked about in 4.13, you get I have this notion that the 1830s are a turning point so far as all this is concerned. That after 1831, you don't see a similar slave revolt along these lines at all, period, until you get to the abolition of slavery and the ratification of the 13th Amendment as a consequence of the Civil War. So, big picture on this topic is that this is I think everybody is aware that this is the growing issue that is going to help define the nation. But this is, a need to take it one perspective on this and to look at the ways that this kind of grew and changed over time.